Welcome to the Jesus Took Naps podcast, where we learn to embrace the remarkably ordinary life of Jesus on our daily journey. Join us as we talk about life and faith, navigate our own relationships with God, and grow in friendship with each other. We will engage questions about the church and the cultural context of our day as we challenge assumptions and grow in our faith together.
Thank y'all for joining us on the Jesus Took Naps podcast again. My name is Drew Anderson, and I'm here with Victor Scott.
Hello, everybody.
And we're going to continue this conversation we've started. The first however many episodes you've listened to have been a little bit about our stories and our relationship, and we've had some fun conversation around all that. And we're going to start to get into some topics. And so we encourage you, as we have done previously, reach out, send in some topics, questions, things you feel like you would want to discuss with us. We want this to be an ongoing conversation. And so we really value your questions and your input. So reach out to us, shoot us messages, get a hold of us, let us know what you'd like to talk about. And today we're going to get into a topic that we're loosely calling disembodied Christian faith. Or how do we embody the Christian faith that seem to be embodied in scriptures in very literal ways? And so we're gonna talk a little bit about that, about how maybe we've disembodied it a little bit. We've made it a little too ethereal. We've talked about this in previous episodes, where maybe we've over spiritualized the Christian faith.
Oh, yeah.
And so it goes right along with the title of our podcast of trying to look at the humanity of Jesus, look at our own humanity, and then understand how Jesus and God shows up in the midst of that. So, Victor, when you hear the words disembodied Christian faith, like what comes to mind?
Well, I start thinking of ghosts. I start thinking of strange
I just thought about
religious
Casper.
practices. I didn't say it. I was thinking it, which means that we're definitely on the same wavelength. But I think the primary thing that comes to mind actually is a story that Jesus tells, or something he says to the Pharisees. He basically accuses them of being what he called whitewashed tombs, which is basically that they were full of bones, full of death, but there was no life in them, right? And so they had this appearance of life, but there was nothing there. There was no substance. There was no real meat to it. And that they used all this spiritual language. They used the place that they held in society as an excuse for not actually doing the things that God had called them to do. And so honestly, that was a thought that came to me just as we began this is that a disembodied faith, or a faith that isn't really incarnating the life of Christ, is fake in that sense. There's no real substance to it. It looks like it has substance, right? You use Casper, for those of you that remember that movie or that reference. There's a shape, but there's no definition to it. There's no thing that distinguishes it from anything else. It's just a thing that's there floating around. And I think that's part of the challenge that we're facing, is this move into higher technology, the social media thing. It's disembodied relationships, right?
Yeah.
And so you're having this change happening in our culture, at least in the Western culture, where we're losing this connectivity, where there's actually this tactile, physical touching of life, right? Where, I mean, I grew up in a Latin family, right? We're Puerto Rican by ancestry, and let me tell you something: slapping hands and slapping people on the back, and touching people on the face, and hugs and kisses—that's just normal to me. And it's very, not being able to do that because going through the pandemic and just social media. So for me, like, life is lived in the same space as other people. That's always been my experience just growing up, and that how it was in the church for me growing up. And then we go through this pandemic, and all of a sudden everything starts to change, and we're starting to move away, right? Can you be the church from home? Yeah, you could have church at home. But can you be the church from home, separate from other people? Right. And so that all of the, by the way, I just opened a can of worms that'll probably take several episodes to unpack.
We're not touching that this time.
But these are the kinds of things, right? These are the kinds of things that are happening. And so this mindset, I think it's more of a mindset, this idea that we don't have to be in the same space. and say we can be the church. I'm not
Mm.
sure if that's true.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I ever believed it was true,
Yeah.
but definitely the challenge of the past couple of years has made me feel more strongly that it can't be
Yeah.
true. That I think there is something about not only living out the faith in space and time in the midst of other people, but also sharing space with other people is an important part of the faith.
Yeah.
That togetherness, right? The what is it, koinonia, the idea
Mhm.
of fellowship,
Mhm.
of community,
Mhm.
right? People throw that around, but we don't always kind of consider the implications of what that means, that there
Mhm.
is a sense in which there has to be a physicality to the
Mhm.
faith,
Mhm.
right? So, God becomes incarnated in the person of Jesus
Mm.
Christ. So God, pure divine spirit, becomes flesh.
Mm.
How do we do that,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
because our perception is fleshly,
Yep.
our perception is physical first, even though we have spirit, but we don't, our existence has never been simply spirit. Our existence has been this combined reality of spirit and
Yeah.
flesh.
Yeah.
And so trying to make sense of that. I mean, I know I'm saying things, but I'm acknowledging right now, I don't even know if I'm saying it right. Like, I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
there's a challenge of even trying to describe this thing,
Yeah.
but I think we should start with what we know, right? What we know is this living out of life with our families, with our coworkers, at our churches, with our, our athletic teams, if we're on teams and rec or whatever. We live life out there. Why how come all of a sudden we think our faith is going to look different than that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the challenge.
That describes the challenge well, and those are valid critiques and questions and things to wrestle through. Yeah, immediately as you were talking, and we don't want to go completely off on the technology tangent right now. We'll probably come back to it at some point, but like I immediately thought when you were sharing the whitewashed tombs thing before you brought up technology, is I immediately thought about avatars. This
Mm,
idea that in an online environment, in a completely technological environment, I can create an avatar in whatever form that I would like to display whatever I would like to display. And it's some sort of version of me, but it by the nature of reality cannot be me.
hmm
Um, it just literally cannot be me. So it's always incomplete. It might be
And it
some.
doesn't even have to represent you, Drew.
No, that's
That's the
true.
other
That's
thing.
true. You can go as far as being whatever you want on some, especially on some of these gaming platforms, right? You can be
Hmm.
literally whatever you want. But let's just say you're trying to be realistic, right? Which is where
Right.
technology's headed supposedly with metaverse stuff. And we're gonna only touch on this. But like think about that or social media, right? Most people are trying to be themselves, like portray
Hmm.
themselves, but it's always going to be an incomplete picture, right? And this is
Hmm.
like they'll get upset. This happened years ago, right? People started getting upset that Instagram, it's only your highlight reel moments. And so then you almost had this
Right.
reverse trend of like, can I somehow share all the bad moments of life as if to even
Hmm.
out this reality that Instagram was kind of highlight reels. And I kind of laughed at it because I was like, yo, there's nothing you can do about it. It just is what it is. Like you're not gonna like
Right.
correct what social media is. It just is. You're not going to be able to share every moment of your life on social media. That's impossible because you're never meant to. Because because you actually have a real life. like
Right.
you have a literal real life. Social media is just highlights. Now it can be good highlights or bad highlights, but no matter what, it's always going to be highlights.
Hmm.
And so there's no way to correct that because that's what it is. That's the thing it is. So it's just this weird, like, disembodying of life, period, right? Of me. And then the Christian world gets caught up in it, or I, as a Christian, get caught up in it. But I would propose that it's not new. Like, the whole reason I wanted to bring this up is because I actually think I was passed down a disembodied faith before the
Hmm.
internet existed. Well, not really, but I mean, the very beginnings of the internet. I'm not that old, but at the beginnings of the internet, before social media existed, before we were disembodying ourselves, like during the pandemic, I was passed down a faith in a disembodied way. Like that's a
Right.
part of my story that I was given faith in the context of these experiences of God, not in the context
Hmm.
of a relationship with God. That was the faith I was handed. And let me get real practical, like describing this for people. Like when my moments of faith, when my moments of quote unquote relationship with God are only happening in a setting where relationships are not even possible, meaning
Right.
at a large conference event or in a large group setting where there's not actual relationship happening, but there's just interchange or I don't know another word, but transaction. It's very transactional. If that's my experience of God, that's the faith I'm receiving. The faith I'm
Well, it's almost,
receiving is this
yeah.
transactional experiential faith. It's not embodied. It's not relational.
The way I would say it is, it's cordial, right?
Cordial.
Everyone has
Okay, yeah.
everyone has pleasantries, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about the social interaction aspect of it.
Yeah.
So we go to church and we say hello, God bless you, blessed and highly favored. We use all the churchy language, but there's no. I didn't learn anything about you,
Yeah.
right? I didn't really
Right.
experience anything with you. I shared the space with
Yeah.
you, and I shared a couple of
Yep.
pleasantries, but no relationship actually happened. Now, you could say that the event itself wasn't designed for that. But then that also begs the question: how many of those kinds of events should we participate in
Yep.
if we're going to build the kind of faith that we see Jesus building with his
Yep.
disciples, right? This kind of community he's building,
Yep.
kind of relationships that he's establishing with them. And
Yep.
so and I agree with you. I would say that for a good part of my life, I felt the same as you did, that there is this sense in which we go to church. No, I am a member of the church and I am connecting with the church at a
That's
place
right.
that houses the
Yeah.
church, right? And this kind of language has been going round and round and round for decades. This is
Sure.
not
Oh yeah.
new,
Yeah.
but I
No.
think what's new is we're starting to see some of the shortcomings of not
Mhm.
really recognizing that the reality of
That's
this,
right.
right? I think that's what's happening is we're
Yes.
starting to see, okay, we have not really talked, we've talked around it, but we haven't talked about it. We
Yeah.
haven't really addressed what's wrong with this
Yep.
approach to living life together and
Yep.
doing faith or church.
Yep.
And so now we're seeing the effects of it.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing people who are not only embracing this distant, unphysical expression of faith, but they're saying this is the right way of doing it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem is that we've been. You're right. This has been alive and well in the church for a long
Yeah.
time, but now, again, not going into the technology stuff too much, but that is giving us the tools to actually make it
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Before that
For
wasn't even
sure.
present.
For sure. Yeah. We didn't even have the option. That's right. We didn't have the option. And I listen, it's just in our stories, right? So like you come to a moment of one of the most crucial moments of someone's life is to make the initial decision to believe in Jesus as Savior and
Hmm.
Lord, right? And you come to that moment of faith in the context of intimate relationships within your family. And I
Hmm.
come to that moment of faith in the context of hundreds of people who do not know me. And that
Mm.
shapes you. I don't want to pass this up because it does. It necessarily shapes the kind of faith you're
Hmm.
receiving. When you receive faith in a non-relational context, in a disembodied context, then you're receiving a disembodied faith. And I know people are going to push back against that because they're going to talk about the genuineness of their experience and they're going to talk about how Jesus showed up for them and all of these sorts of things. But so far in my life, I've never heard of anyone who experienced Jesus like Paul did. Paul was really unique on the road to Damascus. He experiences a physical Lord. I've heard of people having dreams of Jesus. None of them have ever
Hmm.
described a physical Jesus, though, meeting them in their space. Now, I might be wrong about that, but I've never heard of anyone who described it that way. I would certainly not describe my own experience with God in these corporate environments that way. Jesus was not physically present with me. I did not have that sort of manifestation of Jesus in front of me like Paul did.
Right.
So, yeah, Paul got to experience an embodied Jesus on the road to Damascus, but Jesus himself says, "Hey, y'all will have seen me." Like these are the post-resurrection stories. You know, good for y'all that y'all believed in seeing me, but blessed are those, or highly
Hmm.
favored are those, whatever language you want to use, are those who will never see me and yet believe. But the piece there is not that they're just going to believe in some ethereal spiritual thing. It's that they're going to actually be passed down faith in the way that Jesus passed it down to the apostles. That's why the apostles were so serious about who was an apostle and who was not during that time period. We use apostle language today in a different way than it was uniquely used during that time. There was a uniqueness to those apostles because those
Hmm.
apostles actually had seen physically and touched the Lord, and Paul gets to be counted among them, right? And it's an embodied faith because as Jesus passed it to them, so then they turn around and pass the faith down. That's why it's people get hung up on, or have we actually received the faith passed down from the apostles? It's not just about intellectual ideas when people talk about
Yeah.
that. They're talking about the actual lifestyle of Jesus, the physicality of faith that was passed down in community to them. Is that
Yeah.
what we're actually receiving or not?
I think the challenge, and as you're sharing, I'm just thinking, man, so many things are running through my
Yeah.
brain. But the one thing that came to me that I think is often overlooked is this simple thing that Jesus says near the end of his ministry with on earth and his time with the disciples. He says, I'm going to say it in the form of a question, but he says, how are they going to know that you're my
Mm,
disciples? Right.
mm,
Right. That's the
yeah.
question inherent in what Jesus actually said. What
Yeah.
he said was, this is how they
This
will
is
know.
how they
Who's
will know.
they?
Yeah.
Someone who is not us, right? Who is not a part of this community. This is how they are going to know that you are my disciples, right? And he says, how is that? You have to love one another,
Mm,
right? So the evidence of the faith being passed down is the love in the community of the people who claim to have it,
mm, yes.
right? And I think that's what we
Yes.
miss is that there is doctrinal truth that is passed down from generation to
For sure.
generation.
Yeah.
There
That's an
is
assumption.
realities about God's character that are being disclosed in
For
scripture,
sure.
right? That's why we have canon. But the evidence to the
Mm,
non-believing
mm,
world of Jesus's actual life
mm.
is the life in community of his
Yeah.
disciples. And so if you read First John is a great example of this because it's super, super practical. But he talks about, how do you know that you're a disciple? You love people who you don't really want to love,
Yeah.
right? How do you know that you are living out your faith, right? Because you are seeing things in yourself that you're helping to communicate to other people.
Yeah.
And over in First John, you see this pattern
Yeah.
where he says, this is how you
This is how
know.
you know.
This is how you
That's
know.
right.
This is how you know. Well, what does that mean? There's action there.
Yeah.
He's talking about an action that is performed that people can
Yeah.
see, not only in yourself, right? You can see it in yourself, but others can see it in you.
That's right.
But then it's between us that we're seeing this as
That's
well.
right. And
And so
and
I think
all of
that's the
Jesus's
challenge.
greatest displays of love were physical. They were all physical. He gets on his hands and knees with a towel and water. He washes their feet. He takes a meal that they're sharing and he breaks bread and takes the cup of wine and he has them consume these things. He hangs on a literal cross. He allows Thomas and the disciples to touch his wounds.
Hmm.
Every thing that Jesus does is physical. Yes, there's like where the one story, what is it with the Roman centurion where he heals from a
Hmm.
distance, right? Where he just
Hmm.
calls out the miracle from a distance. But that is the exception to the rule. I mean, like not even close the exception to the rule. That's like
But here's the thing. The reason he does that is because the centurion says he doesn't need to, but who's he doing the action for? He's not technically doing it for the guy who's sick. He's doing it for the guy in front
yeah,
of him.
that's true. So still the physical that's well, yeah, because
And he was on his way.
right
So he
there,
was
physically
marching
present.
to,
That's right.
correct. He's marching
That's
to the
right.
house,
That's
but he
right.
said, so what happens is that there's this
Mm,
double-sidedness. There is and we keep using the word physical, but the word that I think probably would be better would be enacted. It's the enacted
okay, yeah.
life,
Yeah.
right? We're enacting this so that it's not just inside my head,
Mm,
it's not just quote unquote in my heart, it's
mhm.
actually lived out
Yeah,
in my
yeah,
hands, in my feet, in my mouth, and
that's right.
everything. So I'm enacting this faith. And I think that's the going back to the centurion story real quick, because I think that's what's going on. Jesus says, well, let me go to your house. But the centurion makes an interesting point because of what he says,
Mm,
right? He says to Jesus, if you don't have to be physically present with me for the reality of what you're going to do to happen.
mhm,
He says, just speak the word and your emissary, your representative can go, right? You don't even have to go, but your emissary can go. And that is the lesson for us, that Jesus is present in the world in us
mm.
because his authority has been given to us as his
Oh,
people.
yes.
And now we are the agents of his will, in the world, right? So this idea, dude, I'm getting chills. I'm getting chills. This idea that Jesus has to be physically present is a misunderstanding of the truth of what the centurion actually said.
Yeah.
He said, Jesus, your physical presence exists in the physical presence of the people you send into the world.
Yes. 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 Oh my goodness. And this is the passage from this past Sunday. We're recording this episode right after the second Sunday in Easter. So we were with Thomas and the whole story in John around the disciples. And Jesus makes this statement, right? That just at first glance would come off so insane to people, that who you forgive will be forgiven, right? And
Hmm.
it sounds so like, well, Jesus, wait a minute, you're giving your disciples the authority to decide who is forgiven by you? No, I mean, no, that's not
Yes and no.
yeah,
You can say yes,
it's like
but
yes
sort
and
of.
no, but not really. What he is saying is that in you forgiving others, there's this forgiveness that is coming from me through you to others. Like the way others experience my forgiveness is by you forgiving them. Like that's what he's getting at. It's this idea of incarnation. It's this idea of enacting the faith, or this physicality of faith. As you are acting out forgiveness towards those around you, that is going to be the literal display of my forgiveness, my
See,
salvation.
it's from Jesus through me.
Yes,
It's not from
that's
me
right.
to you.
That's right.
That's the problem, is we don't understand this idea of authority. They don't of this of delegation, right? Of delegated responsibility, right? We live in a kingdom. I know for those of us that are American or in the Western world, we have this idea of being citizens,
Mhm.
but we're not citizens of the kingdom of God. We are subjects of the kingdom of God, which means that we are under a specific kind of authority as it relates to how God is interacting with us. And I know that can be difficult to hear.
Yeah,
It's taken me years to process
yeah,
it. So if that's new to you, hey, welcome to the club. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that, by the way,
yeah.
as you're interacting with
It's
us. But
hard. It's hard. Yeah.
but that's the challenge, is that we have been given authority.
Mm,
It's given to us by the higher authority, which is
mm.
Jesus, and he gives it to us. And so when he says, when you forgive, make sure that you're doing it in a way that I would do it.
Yes.
Don't just go out willy-nilly going out doing whatever you want to do with people, because what you're doing is you're also making it difficult for them to interact with Jesus themselves if we forgive things and they don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If we do things in an out of order way, people are going to get all kinds of bad
That's
ideas
right.
about what God is actually
That's
doing
right.
in their life.
Well, and this is why I struggle with, and God's grace is good, right? Listen, God can do all things. I've had this conversation so many times. Like, someone will be like, well, God still works through that, and I'm like, yeah, just because He can doesn't mean He wants to. Like, there's a whole
Right.
different conversation. Like, yeah, God can work through anything because His grace is good, but I shouldn't be making Him have to work harder than He needs to. than He needs to.
Right. We're obligating God to things that he didn't say he wanted
That's
to
right.
be doing.
That's right. So, anyways, that's kind of a side note, but relates to what I'm saying, in that, like, I feel like the faith that I received was given to me in this very disembodied way. Like, it was this transactional faith. That's what I entered into. And so then it took all this like catching up with God in his relationship with me for him to catch me up to just the baseline of what Christian faith should actually be, this embodied faith. It took him years to have to work through what I had been given just to get me to the actual baseline of Christian faith. It's like I had to play catch up. And it's not, I don't have any hard feelings. Like, I'm not blaming anyone. There's no like sense of like, Rage Against the Machine in this. I'm just saddened by it because I feel like, why would we do this? Why would we do this to people? Why would we give people something that isn't what Jesus actually wants them to have? Why would we give them
Because that's what
something
they got.
that's incomplete? And yes, you're
Because
right.
that's what they
It's
got.
because that's
That's what they
what
got.
they got. So that's what they passed down. So I get it, but I'm just saying, now that I see it, right? Now
Hmm.
that God has opened my eyes, now that I've received what he actually has for me, I'm going, I can't give them anything else. All I can give them is what Jesus has given me, right? This is what
Right.
that passage with the disciples where they're like, silver and gold have we not, but what we do
Hmm.
have we'll give to you. That's what I feel
Hmm.
like. Like, I can't give you anything else other than this embodied faith. Like, I don't know what else to give you. If you're,
Well, once you
yeah,
see it, you have to do it.
yeah, because
You
I'm
have
like,
to
if
do
you're
it.
looking for some other kind of faith, you're going to have to find it from someone else. Because at this point, all I can give you is an embodied faith. And and it's what you need anyways. Like, that's the irony. Like, you may be asking for something else, but it's not actually what you need. Because I've been there. But now I know, no, this is what I need. I need the physical elements of Christ's body and
Yeah.
blood. I need the physicality of laying on of hands. I need the anointing with oil. I need the waters of baptism. I need the community of faith that eats together, that has actual meals together and sits across tables together and laughs together and hugs together and cries together and laments together. Like, I need that. That's what I need.
Well, here's the thing, and there's 2 points that I want to make. Well, there's probably 3, but 2 real quick. One is that is by design,
Yeah,
right? God told Adam and Eve, well, told Adam, it's not good for you to be
that's
alone,
right.
right? So that is not just a story.
That's right.
That is revelation, right? There's something deeper going on there. There's a reason that God put that in the Bible, right? That's number one. But the 2 is that we should not see this desire, this need for community, for living out, for enacting life together and faith together as some sort of rudimentary or based uh, reality.
That's right.
It is the essence of what we're trying to do.
That's
It
right.
is not merely some introduction. It's not merely just something that you do when you're immature. No. The more mature you become, the more vital this becomes to your sustaining life.
Yes.
And I think that's part of the problem. But I want to go back to something that you said at the beginning, and I had the thought and it came back, and now I don't want to miss it a third time.
Yeah.
The idea of accepting that we received this the way we did. And I want to point to this. I have an undergraduate in sociology, and my wife likes to say I'm the worst sociologist she ever met. But I did learn a few things along the way. And one of the things that I want to say is that most of us received assumptive realities or categories. We receive things that are a part of our default that we take for granted, right? I'm not saying they're good or bad.
Yep.
I'm just
They
saying
just
they're
are.
present.
Yeah.
They're present. And we need to recognize that there are things that are present because of where we grew up or how we grew up or the people that we grew up around and the things that they said. Not necessarily that they taught us. They said in their enacting of life, whether it was religious or not religious, what they did formed and shaped how we view the world. Right. And then all of a sudden we get introduced to this idea of faith, if it came to us later in life, or even for someone like me who had it my entire life. But even then, I'm being introduced to new things.
That's right.
And I'm having to find a place, right? I'm trying to place that inside these categories or boxes that I have in my brain. So the part of the challenge is not fighting or ignoring or condemning that.
That's right.
It's saying, okay, how was that impacting me now that I'm older and I'm reflecting? How did that impact me? And where is that point where I'm going to see the challenge?
That's right.
And I think that's something that I want to encourage everybody. It's something I struggle with, even like I said, even having grown up in the church. There are still assumptions that I have made about myself, about God, about what the church is, about everything. And then I encounter a truth in God's word. I'm like, okay, even my assumption, as quote unquote well informed as I thought it might have been, still has to be challenged.
Yeah.
It still has to change.
Yeah.
And so my desire is not for anyone to feel like, well, that we could say, well, that's just the way I was raised. True. But that doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't mean you should keep doing that.
Yeah.
We need to challenge that, but challenge it in a healthy way, saying, okay, God, I'm going to give this to you. I've struggled with this particular area of my life, this thought process or whatever, but I recognize now that it isn't really bringing me closer to you. It's actually becoming a hindrance to my relationship with you or those around me. What do I need to do to minimize the impact of that, so that I can actually live out this truth that I know is from you?
Yeah.
And so what I want to say is we need to acknowledge, accept it, not be critical of it, not judge ourselves about it, but just say it's present. And so now that I know it's present, I'm going to act differently.
That's right.
I'm going to work to make sure that this doesn't have this overwhelming effect in how I'm trying to, embody and enact this life that I have.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say that because it can be very easy for us to see those assumptions, those defaults that we have in our thought process, and be very negative about those things. Say, oh, this sucks. Why did I have to, God, why did you let this happen? We can get real accusatory real quick.
Yeah.
And we don't need to do that.
Yeah.
We don't need to
It's
do
not
that. God's
necessary.
grace is so good.
That's right.
And his love for us is so good that he brought us to a point where now we're aware of
That's
it.
right.
And now we can actually do something
right.
with it and do something about
That's
it.
right. That's right.
So anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there before I forgot a third time.
Yeah. No, I don't blame you. Well, and I want to and I want to put out there, like, there's not a desire in this for us to like bash technology or minimize that it's still useful.
Yeah.
I mean, we're using it right now to record this podcast in two different cities, hours away from each other. We're not minimizing that technology is useful. We're asking what is its place in its usefulness, right? That's the question. Is like technology or large gatherings or anything that disembodies our faith by its just is what it is. Like, just accept
Hmm.
it. Like, this thing disembodies faith. Like, it requires that I cannot actually be highly relational and physical. We just need to understand their place. They aren't wrong. Like, they aren't sinful wrong. We need to get rid of them altogether. Like, neither of us are advocating for an Amish lifestyle, right? I mean, that would be an extreme example of saying, well, I'm going to embody faith to its highest degree. We're not advocating for that. We're not saying, oh, we should all go back to being Amish. But we are saying, hey, we do need to be asking the question, what's the place of these things, right? And so, what is the place of the large gathering of God's people? Is that actually the context that crucial moments of faith should be passed down to people? I think we should ask that question, right? Should we be having mass altar calls and large gatherings? I think it's a valid question. Should we be doing things in these places where faith cannot be embodied to the degree that Jesus embodied it? Should we be having these crucial moments of faith for people? It's a valid question. And I think we need to wrestle with those things. Like, what is the balance of, hey, I'm fully embodying this faith, or hey, I'm just kind of living it out in this kind of general sense in this large group of people? Those are vastly different things. I think this is, and this will impact so many conversations we have, because we can go off on so many tangents right now about this
Hmm.
topic, right? This impacts how we view evangelism, right? This impacts how we view just the community of believers in general, how we organize ourselves, what we organize ourselves around. It just impacts so much. I mean, I love that you said that really it's the mature expression that allows us to embrace these highly embodied acts of faith. Because I think growing up, like, things like potlucks or meals or like family events were
Hmm.
were were talked about as secondary to the real mission of the church. And 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 nowadays I look at it and I just go, no, that is the real mission of the church. Like, how much how much more the church can we be when we're eating meals together? How much more the church can we be when we are gathering our family with other families to love one another? Like, we can't be more the church in those moments. Like,
See, and that's something I remember growing up. Our church. So this now I'm old, so by some standards. But I remember being, 7, 8 years old, and in the middle of our service, so we would have our worship service, and then my dad, who was pastoring the church, we had an intentional 15-minute coffee break right before the sermon so that everyone could catch up and talk to each other, and we'd all go downstairs into the basement fellowship area. We'd grab coffee and drinks, and then we'd all get together, chat a little bit, and then we'd come upstairs for the message. And there was this intentional break in the middle of, and this is in the
wild.
80s, in the middle of the
That's
service for
wild.
this
You have
fellowship,
never told me
right?
that.
Yeah, for this fellowship. And then there, listen, real quick story, because I don't want to go too off on this, but I remember my dad was asked to take over this church. It was basically dead in the inner city of Chicago.
Mm,
There were basically six septuagenarians, so 70-year-olds.
mm,
And he told them, he went to them, had a meeting with them, just them, as he was coming in, young Hispanic pastor, inner city. uh, this was a Swedish Norwegian and heritage church, right? Norwegian Baptist
mm,
in the old school,
mm.
right? And he went to them. He said, "Y'all don't have to stay. I know this is the big transition, having a minority pastor." He says, "But if you go somewhere else, you'll get lost in the crowd. But if you stay here," he said something like this: "You will be the memory keepers of the history of this church. You will be the grandparents of this church." And I remember those people. We would go to their house for Christmas and we would have dinner with them. And I remember them telling us stories. And one of them was the organ player, and she would let me come up and play the organ during practice. I mean, I love those people like they
Mm,
were my own grandparents.
mm.
And it was because of a simple conversation where my dad went to them and says, if you stay, we will love you and
Mm,
we will keep you
mm,
and receive you,
mm.
and you will be like, the patriarchs and the matriarchs of this church. And I just remember that being the way
It's just so
our church
refreshing. It's
was,
just so refreshing.
right? And this is back in the
Yeah,
80s, right? When no one else was doing this in
yeah,
the inner city.
yeah.
And so, but I think part of that comes from our very highly relational culture,
That's
right?
true. Yeah,
And so he was just expressing that he believed that to be true.
that's right.
Still does. We still do
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
So like we have fellowships all the time, and we want people to get together, even in our church today. Because I serve with my dad now. For those of you that may not know it, I'll probably throw that in every once in a while
Yeah,
because people might forget.
yeah,
But I think this idea of church, what the church is a gathering of people, and sometimes it's for fellowship, and sometimes it's for instructions, and sometimes it's for mission, or sometimes whatever it is, but it's just the people is the
yeah.
church, right? The gathering.
That's
We
right.
say that all the time. It's become a cliche, but what are the practical implications of that? And that's where we don't get it.
Yeah,
We don't get it.
yeah,
And that's where we struggle, and we need to get back to that,
yeah.
right?
We do.
How well do you know the people that you sit around,
Yeah,
the church that you're in?
yeah,
How well do you know them?
yeah,
Do you know their kids' birthdays? Are they married? Do they have, are they grandparents? Like stuff like that. Do you know some of the basic facts about their life? Right? Can you say, hey, can I pray for your niece? I heard that your niece was in an accident. Can I
mm,
pray for
mm.
her? Well, how did you hear about that? Well, because I know people who know you, and I know you, and I want you to know that I care. Right?
Yeah,
That's just a simple example, but it's that kind of thing.
that's right.
But yeah, this whole idea of fellowship and community, those have become buzzwords, but the manifestation of that
Yeah,
has to be so intentional,
yeah, yeah.
right? It's costly. It's costly to be
It
open
is.
to let people into
It
that.
is. And they may not reciprocate. They may do you harm. You're giving them the opportunity to do you harm because you're becoming vulnerable, right? Bonhoeffer talks about this, that people love the idea of community but don't actually like the reality of community. He gets into that in his Cost of Discipleship book. And it's just the truth of where we're at in our society right now, that our society in large struggles with relationships and community already. Like that's the inherited society that we live in. We have to be vastly different than that in the Christian community. Like we have to be. We have to, if we're going to live out the faith that we've actually been given by Jesus Christ, it has to be physical. It has to be embodied. It has to be enacted. It has to be communal. It has to be in relationship with other people. There's no other way that we can. It's just, there's no other way. I cannot, without actively forgiving other people, I cannot receive forgiveness. Like it's just how God designed life to work. And so I think we're at a crucial moment in our culture where, like we've said, none of this is new. I think it's just risen to the surface. Finally, it's always been there somewhere below the surface. Now it's at the surface, like it's there, and people are um, realizing it, and they don't know
It's affecting more people
it's
now.
affecting more people. People are realizing it, and they don't even have the language for it, but they just know
Hmm.
something's wrong. Something isn't right. This doesn't feel right. Um, and so they're acting and reacting, but we need to call it out. Once we're able to name it and see it, we need to call it and say, no, this is what it is. It's that the faith that Jesus actually lived out and passed down was this embodied, highly relational, enacted faith. And that's what we have to get back to today. That's what we have to get
I
back to.
think it's a kind of fatigue, Drew. I think it's a kind of spiritual fatigue where we're tired of doing things that we know are not really accomplishing what we believe God said they should be
Mm,
accomplishing.
mm,
I think it's a form of burnout, honestly. Because as you're talking, I'm like, man, that sounds a lot like what burnout sounds like.
mm.
Where you keep doing and keep doing and you keep giving and giving and giving and giving, and there doesn't seem to be anything kind of coming back to replace it, to recharge.
Yep.
You get tired of that real quick. Just as uh, made me think of something my dad told us at our church a long time ago. He said, and he told us his family, like my brothers and my sister. He said, um, I want to be a friend to people, and people can't take advantage of what I freely give.
Yeah.
Right. So if you feel like you're being taken advantage of when you're giving, what did you actually give?
Mm,
Or was there an expectation of reciprocity,
mm.
right? An expectation of that was a transaction. That was not a gift, right? And I'm gonna tell you that challenged me all the
Yeah.
time because I
Yeah.
remember what he said it, and I was like, man, is my friendship transactional with people,
Hmm.
right? Or is it I'm just gonna give it to you, and if you don't appreciate it, that's on you,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And having that kind of understanding of it is that I because my friendship to you is an expression of who I want to be, of who I
Yes.
am.
Yes.
But if it's transactional, if I'm only doing it because I want you to give me something back, that's also saying something about me.
Mm,
I mean, I like it,
yeah.
but
But it
but that's
is.
part of the challenge,
It's right.
right? That's part of the challenge. And I remember the struggle with that is, do I really want to be who Jesus was to his
Mm,
disciples? He loved them so much that he gave his life for them, right? And the thing is, the challenge is that Jesus knew that no one else could do it like he could do it. But that's what he's calling us to. He's calling us to the kind of life where we accept that the people we're giving our lives to and for cannot, and probably we should not expect for them to be able to pay us back, right? Now we're getting to the heart of it, right? Now we're really getting not only to the heart of it in here, but what's really the problem? The problem is that we have lost, to some degree, this idea of sacrificial living
yeah.
for others.
Yeah.
We don't really know what that is,
Yeah.
right? We struggle with that
Yeah. We
because
do.
we feel taken advantage
That's
of. We
right.
might have been hurt with
That's right.
somebody, right? And a lot of times say, I've been hurt by the church. No, you were hurt by somebody in the church, right? The church itself didn't hurt you. Someone in there pretending to be a part of the church, probably in leadership, God forbid, but they probably were in leadership and they took advantage of their position, took advantage of your trust, and now you're in this position where you're hurt. But that still doesn't mean that we can't heal and from that hurt and still try to be who Jesus was. Jesus was killed by religious leaders. He was killed by people who claimed to be wanting the Messiah. And there he was, and he was still killed by them.
Yeah.
And then he looked at them and he said, Father, do what?
Give them.
Forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. If they knew what they were doing, they wouldn't do it.
Mm,
Right. And so most of us are there. Most of us are actually caught up in situations because of our inability to see what this really is, what is really happening. And what's really happening is that we don't know what's going on.
mm,
We think we do, but we really don't, because most of us wouldn't do it. I mean, Jesus said it. If they knew what they were doing, if they really knew, they wouldn't be doing this.
mm.
But how many of us do it? We do it anyway.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard because it's the dilemma of what Christ lived and the faith that he displayed and then passed down to us. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's hard. Um,
We're actually raising the bar here. I mean, we're just
yeah.
raising it up higher and higher
Yeah.
and higher and
And
higher.
and neither of us can even reach it ourselves. And so I mean, but this is the pursuit. This is the pursuit of the Christ-like life, of the sacrificial love that he displayed for us in very physical, real ways, that then he asks us to turn around and do the same thing. So man, this topic's gonna go on and on and on. You'll see threads of this topic throughout so many more conversations coming up. And there's some very specific things we want to get into. Like, I mean, we want to talk about Gnosticism and kind of the Gnostic heresy that pops up early in the church that has continued to today in different forms. And
Mm-hmm.
we want to get into some of these ways that we have disembodied faith, that we've turned faith into something that it no longer looks like the faith that Jesus displayed and passed down. And how we then can correct that, can course correct that in our own relationships, in our own contexts, in our own churches, in our own families, around our tables, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can we course correct this thing before we pass down something that was just simply passed down to us, but that we didn't take the time to actually look at it and go, wait a minute, was this thing passed down to me actually the thing that Jesus passed down? Or is it incomplete? Is it not what he passed down? And how do I need to
Mm-hmm.
correct how I'm passing it down so that it can be what he passed down? It's going to be an ongoing conversation for sure, and there'll be threads of it as we move along. But this has been a great start. I really appreciate all that you shared, and appreciate your perspective. And it's been the journey I've been on, right? Re-embodying the Christian faith, repersonalizing God. I've used so many different kinds of language about it, but trying to say the same thing. Making God real again, putting flesh on Jesus again. And when I'm able to do that, when I'm able to allow God and Jesus, the Holy Spirit in me, to be enacted,
Mm-hmm.
to be embodied, to be physical, that's I can feel it. Like that's what Jesus wants. Like this is what makes God happy, and it's just powerful. It's powerful. It transforms me, and it transforms those around me.
Well, the thing that I would say is, the kind of the tagline for this podcast is the remarkably ordinary life of Jesus, right? We said a remarkably ordinary
Yeah,
podcast,
yeah,
but it's around this idea of Jesus' life being remarkably ordinary. And I think we came on that just kind of by accident, but as I've reflected on it more in just this conversation, I realized that until we see our faith as being something remarkably ordinary, we're going to struggle with looking for overly sensational expressions of faith, right? Our faith isn't supposed to be, flashy. It's supposed to be ordinary. It's just us. It's just the way we're living. And I think that is the goal, at least for me, as I think about it, and what we're trying to do is just share just our journey with each other and with whoever just happens across this and joins us on this journey. Love to hear what God is challenging you on and how you're processing some of these things, and help us to sharpen our own thinking. I love having conversations. I love just throwing things out there and seeing how God is using it.
yeah,
And this is the challenge, is that we want to create an environment where that is not the unusual, it's the norm.
yeah. That's right.
It's just what we do,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
How many times did the disciples ask Jesus questions and they're like, how do you not know this?
Yeah,
Have you not been with me for this long and you still don't know?
yeah.
And so I think that's also part of the normalcy of our faith journey.
That's right.
Is that those people who seem to have who've been at this a little longer and seem to have learned a few things that we're still trying to figure out, we should ask them. We should talk to them. I love talking to older Christians who definitely seem to have just this peace and calm about them. Like, man, how did you get there? Please help me get some of that.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
And I love that invitation. If you've been listening, and you've been joining in on this conversation, we want you to reach out and share with us. Like, as you think about this idea of disembodied faith, or re-embodying faith, repersonalizing it, making it an enacted faith again, how does that strike you? What comes up in your mind? What comes up in your heart? How do you react to that? Do you have any stories that you'd like to share around that? We just find this to be very true in our own lives and in our own friendship with one another. That this reality of embodying faith again has become vital to us in our own relationship with Jesus. And so we really feel like that this is where the church needs to focus as we move forward, and we'll begin to see people come to faith for the first time, because they'll get to see Jesus in and through us. And it's a beautiful thing. Well, hey guys, thank you for joining us and for continuing to track along with us. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation today as you're listening to it. Make sure you check us out on socials, hit up our website, locals, all that good stuff. And we'll continue this conversation with you guys. Have a good one.
You've been listening to Jesus Took Naps, a remarkably ordinary podcast. Make sure to like our Jesus Took Naps Facebook page and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at JesusTookNaps.live. Also, go to our website, JesusTookNaps.live, to sign up for our email newsletter for updates about the podcast. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.